course. If you've taken the course once, and that basically says you don't have to take it again. Same as a hunter safety course. Once you've taken the course, you don't have to do that. As you know, the current state system is a combination of local and state issuing authorities. While that's worked well enough for in-state purposes, it's caused problems when Maine permit holders seeking to go out-of-state or out-of-state permits with reciprocity agreements. Many states are more than happy to honor another state's concealed weapons permit as long as certain conditions are met. Unfortunately, Maine's disjoint system disqualifies our permit holders from many of these agreements. Most often, it's the lack of a central issuing authority and a standard form on which the permit is issued. By making the state police the central issuing authority, a role they already play and have performed for a majority of Maine communities, we can ensure that Maine permit holders receive the benefits of reciprocity with other states. This change would allow Maine permit holders to carry concealed in over 20 other states. And that was, 20 was a low number. I think the number is more than 28. There's the possibility of 38 states that would allow reciprocity. Additionally, it would provide local law enforcement with a single permit type from a single issuing agency to ensure that the permit was valid. For permit seekers, it would provide a single process and procedure for getting a permit rather than dealing with particular specifics of the local issuing authority's process. I don't want to take anything away from the local issuing authorities, and their ability to issue the permits. Like, I know the Portland Police Department, I'm sure they do a fine job with background checks. And they probably have a decent card that you can carry, but I really think that the state police would be a better spot to have all the permits issued for many reasons. For those who may wonder, the third component, the removal of the 5-year limit on handgun safety, it's simply recognizing that any valid course should be recognized without a time limit. Further, an individual who may have taken the course many years ago and has had a valid permit for many years should not be required to take the course simply because their issuing authority has changed. In other words, the person just may have moved, and that their new issuing authority doesn't recognize the old issuing authority's permit. So they'd have to retake the course and meet all the requirements of the new issuing authority. If this law passes, which I hope you guys do, we won't really have to worry about that too much because the state police will issue all the permits. As you are aware, there have been several debates regarding concealed carry in recent years in this body. There's a bill in session which has considerable support to eliminate the requirement of a permit within the state. Should that effort be successful, I believe that this bill is still necessary. In truth, it may be even more important should constitutional carry pass. While an in-state requirement for a permit would not be needed to gain reciprocity, the right to carry in other states, a permit would be needed. Many Maine residents will still want a permit for this reason, and this proposal would ensure that a process is in place to issue those permits in a way that meets reciprocity agreements. Regardless of the outcome of other legislation, this is a sensible change to our state's concealed carry laws and ensures Maine residents can maximize the value of their concealed carry permit. I urge you to support the bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative LaJoy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you.
This is almost exactly like a bill that was presented 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. You didn't happen to present it this way 2 years ago, did you?
It wasn't my bill a couple of years ago, and I'm sure.
Do you recall that?
Yeah, there was, and I believe that one probably passed also.
Well, the thing, and again, I mentioned it a little while ago. I guess it was. I was going to ask you, do you recall if it was passed or?
It was passed and then ultimately vetoed. I think the chief executive wanted to have constitutional carry as part of this bill, which is why it's not in this bill.
I thought that, however, I just wanted somebody to reaffirm it for me, so thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions. Representative Schmidt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Representative.
Thank you.
I want to zero in on the removing the requirement of a firearm safety training course. As I understand it, you're just wanting to grandfather those individuals in who already have a permit from having to then go through that same typical process for a new issuing authority, correct?
Yeah, they would still need to take the class, but right now, like, say I have a concealed carry permit, and it's going to expire next year. If I do not go and renew that within a year, then I would have to retake the course and start over fresh again. However, currently, you know, whether I conceal the gun or not, I'm still proficient with the use of the handgun, because I go to the range or whatnot. So what I learned in my course, which I did take, just doesn't go away because you don't have the permit. So all this bill would say is that you just, once you've taken the course, you don't have to take it again, much like the CJPS.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Would you be okay with some sort of competency test? I mean, my concern is, you know, just verifying that those skill sets are still there for the individuals that maybe it's been a while, but you recognize the benefit of the safety course, but it's sort of repetitive if you have to keep taking it every couple of years. Would you be okay with some sort of competency test?
Personally, I wouldn't mind, but I don't know if the state police would want to go along with that because they'd probably be the ones that have to do it. I really believe it's kind of like riding a bike. If you're proficient when you take the course, and I had to prove proficiency in my course, it wasn't all day course. It wasn't just a fly-by-night, here you go, off you go, type of get your permit course. We studied the law, we took guns apart, put them back together, and then ultimately, after the whole indoor classroom exercise, we did go out to the range, and we had to prove proficiency right there and then before they gave us the certificate. So I'm certainly not opposed to taking the course in the first place. Everybody should, to get your considered permit. I think training and safety and awareness is certainly key. So, but like I say, I don't know who would do the proficiency after the fact.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Senator Dushanski?
Yes, and one for this bill I support it, to get the training aspect for a second, because we have, we're going to enjoy the events that we have in the past, and did pass. But when it came to the training, I want to see if you agree with me on this, it didn't have as much as do with once you train, you don't lose your training, and once you go through, you don't lose how to do it. It had more to do with responsibility. Just a lot of the permit process is not responsibility, being a responsible person. And so the way the committee looked at it, I don't know if you agree with this or not, is that not renewing your license is like not renewing a driver's license or any other license. Your responsibility to renew the licenses on time. And that was more the context we were using that. Is that the context you want us to use your bill in also, or do you have a reason for us not to look into that responsibility part? Like it's your responsibility to not let it last a year, perhaps, so you don't have to go through the process again.
I understand your question, and certainly we want responsible gun owners, there's no doubt about it. And this doesn't say that you don't have to take the course. This just says that once you've taken it, you don't have to take it again. You know, there's dozens of scenarios where, you know, you may move for a couple of years. You may go overseas, you may, you know, for whatever reason, you might be taking care of your mother in Vermont or wherever, and then you come back, the year's gone by, you're still proficient, but under current law, you have to retake the course again. But I think, you know, I'll be honest with you, the major part of the bill for me is getting the state police to issue the permits and the reciprocity that comes with that. So.
Representative Dedham, you had a question?
I did have a question, but as I've been reminded that this is, I think I'm okay. I'm okay right now.
Seeing no
My
more
ordinance.
questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Dushanski.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Is there anyone from the department here that would like to speak on this bill? Seeing none, we're going to go back to our Public? And a 3-minute clock. So the next person is Lois Reckon.
I want to give you time to get pictures. My name is Lois Reckon, and I'm a resident of South Portland. My voice has gone from 4 hours of sitting in the rotunda, but currently I'm the Executive Director of Family Crisis Services, the Domestic Violence Resource Center serving Cumberland County. Today I'm here to ask you to maintain the policy and practice of requiring the concealed weapons permit in order for legitimate and at least modestly trained gun owners to carry and conceal deadly weapons. I'm nearing the end of 35 years of work in Maine to end domestic violence against our citizens, perpetrated by those closest to them who purportedly love them. It has been a difficult career path, filled with stories that would tear your heart out. Some of the most difficult stories detail the fears of victims, most often women and children. For those whose life is threatened, to think that a perpetrator could be weaponized whenever and wherever they are together creates another level of terror. I've had women tell me of the threats lodged against them, and many of those threats involve guns. Guns under pillows at night to threaten, guns brandished at them in anger. Too often those threats have resulted in homicides. In a report last year filed by Maine's Homicide Review Panel, it was noted that in the previous 2 years, 27 domestic violence homicides had been committed in Maine, 15 of those with guns. That's 57%. Some years ago, weapons were banned in the State House after a legislator himself posed a threat to this body with a gun. It is difficult for me to resist mentioning the apparent hypocrisy of protecting yourselves from concealed or indeed openly carried weapons, and yet endorse removing the smallest of protection from women who are threatened by their intimate partners. If we can continue to prohibit concealed carry by people with current protection from abuse orders against them, felons, those blue-papered by the courts, and illegal immigrants, at least some will continue to be safer than those who every year lose their lives to intimate partners with guns. I urge you to defeat 652. I also urge you to enact, as I read it out in the hall, first I've seen, LD600, which would bring Maine law in congruence with the federal statutes on guns. The reason I urge that is that it would make it much easier for prosecution to happen when there's a violation of currently the federal laws, which can only be adjudicated currently in federal court, which means that very few people can use them. If the state and the state's criminal justice folks could also arrest people for violations under state law, it would make a whole lot less people vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Wow. I love that clock button.
Yeah,
Makes like
You
a
were
lot of
right on
sense.
time.
The next one is James Barrett, number 4. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Senator Rosen, Representative Bowl, and distinguished members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, my name is James Barron from Lewiston. I am here today to testify in favor of LD652, an act to authorize the carrying of concealed handguns without a permit. For many of us, this is commonly known as constitutional carry. It is called that because of our constitutionally guaranteed right to keep and bear arms as provided by the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. However, you may also be aware of Article 1, Section 16 of Maine's Constitution, which says, "Every citizen has the right to keep and bear arms, and this right shall never be questioned." I can tell you that this right is, in fact, being questioned here in Maine. 32 questions, to be precise. That is the number of questions that a resident of this state must answer in Maine's application for a permit to carry concealed handguns in order to be allowed to exercise a civil right to keep and bear arms. More specifically, concealed arms. Yet in Maine, there is no application, no permit, no fee, no training, no expensive classes, no photographs, and no background check to carry a handgun openly. I asked this committee to consider why an article of clothing requires so much scrutiny, because in Maine, that is all that our permit allows a citizen to do. You will hear those in opposition to this bill say many things that are untrue and have never materialized where constitutional carry is already the law of the land. Constitutional carry is also known as Vermont carry. That's because our New England neighbor, the state of Vermont, has never had a permit to carry a concealed handgun in its 224-year history. 224 years of citizens carrying a firearm however they see fit. If the opposition is correct, shouldn't Vermont be one of the most unsafe states in the Union? Yet they have one of the lowest violent crime rates of all. You will also hear those in opposition to this bill say that it will allow criminals and felons to carry concealed handguns. This is untrue for two reasons. First, this bill only changes how one who is in lawful possession of a firearm may carry a handgun in Maine. It does absolutely nothing to change the legality of ownership of firearms for prohibited persons. A prohibited person today will be a prohibited person after this bill's passage into law. Secondly, criminals and felons carry concealed handguns in spite of the current permit system anyway. The very definition of a criminal is one that does not follow the law. The law affects those that are law-abiding, such as you and I. I am sure you all agree that people engaged in violent criminal behavior are not the ones going through a burdensome and expensive process to obtain a permit to carry a concealed handgun. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next is Steve McGinty.
Thank you, Senator Rosen, Representative Powell, and members of the committee. My name is Stephen McGinty. I live in Sumner. I am here today in support of LD652. As a society, our natural right to self-defense is paramount to all our other rights. The right to keep and bear arms is the thing that makes all our other rights more than just words on paper. It is the most essential of our liberties. On a personal level, my ability to have the tool of self-defense, namely a gun with me when I am outside my own home, is also essential to that right. Without the right tool, the right to self-defense is meaningless. Essential means I should not have to ask permission. The citizen should not have to ask for a permit to exercise a right. Imagine if I was not allowed to speak here before you today without first filling out an application, paying $30, submitting passport photos, having a background check, and waiting 30 days just to be given a permit to speak before you. Imagine the right of free speech was as regulated as the right to carry a concealed gun. Would we still make a claim to having a right to free speech? Essential means no permission needed. A right by definition needs to be freely exercised, or you cannot lay a claim to it as a right. Today in Maine, right now, I can carry a handgun openly without any permission, without any training, compelled training. Of course, I would do it voluntarily. And that's an expression of that right to self-defense. No permission needed. Strap the gun in the holster, walk around, and I'm all set with the law. The moment I put a jacket over that gun, I need permission. That is what is at issue today. So all I ask from you today is to legalize what should already be legal, the ability to put a jacket over my gun without permission from my state government. I thank you for your time, and I leave you with one final sentence. The sentence comes from a document you all swore an oath to uphold. Every citizen has a right to keep and bear arms, and that right shall never be questioned. Thank you.
Thank you for leaving beautiful Sumner to come here today. Matthew is next. Conform. You're combining two bills. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Representative Bell, Senator Rosen, and distinguished members of this committee. I come before you today from Portland, Maine, to urge you all to support LD652. I know that 7 of you are already co-sponsors. For that, I thank you. I just want to speak briefly about my own personal life, because I've heard a lot of statistics today, and I feel like my testimony is best delivered in a personal life. I've lived in Maine my entire life. I grew up right here in China. I moved to Portland 10 years ago to go to college at both SMCC for an associate's and USM for a bachelor's degree. I learned firearm safety from my father at the age of 7, gravel yard in Unity, Maine. He taught me the fundamentals of firearm safety, which if I asked each and every one of you, you could name the most important three. I won't do that because I live in 2 to 3 minutes. But if I were to ask you, you would all know them. I learned those 3 basic fundamental safety rules at the age of 7 years old. When I was 21 and I was legally old enough to buy a firearm, I could have had a permit at the age of 18, but I wasn't old enough to purchase one on my own until I was 21. I lived on Portland Street in Portland, which is part of West Bayside. I didn't feel safe walking home at night. My father, myself, and 3 family members all got together, took the permit courses, paid the fees, and got our permits together. That totaled nearly $500 of our own money. I would like to know how a family of 2 parents that live on a basic minimum wage salary, a paycheck to paycheck budget, could afford a $250 expense just to exercise their rights and protect their family. Now, I chose today, I'll step away from the podium so you can see, to wear my holster that I carry concealed and open. I choose to do this because it's more comfortable. If I were to do this and cover this holster, I am now breaking the law. If I have this holster open and I step into my vehicle, I must take this firearm out of this holster, remove the magazine, actuate the slide to clear the breech, just to make it legal to step into my vehicle because the vehicle conceals that firearm. Committee member Druzowski, how safe would you feel if you saw someone doing that on Main Street in Brunswick? Perfectly fine? Handling a firearm in Main Street?
Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in Spencer, I used to say that.
Now, I will speak briefly about James' mention of Vermont. Would any of these members here say that the citizens of Maine are less competent in firearm safety than those in Vermont? That's all. Thank you.
Next is Cheryl Larson.
This is new for me, so do I wait until the clock starts?
You go right ahead.
I will start the
Not until you start speaking your speech will I start.
Oh, okay. First, I want to thank, my name is Gerald Larson. I am from Edgemont, Maine. I want to thank the chairs, Lori Powell and Kimberly Rosen, and all the members of this critical committee that weighs the scales for justice and minds the needs for maintaining and improving public safety for citizens. I am here because I am alive. If I had not had access to a law of not requiring a permit, I would not be here. I would be dead, and so would my son. When you are in domestic violence, the idea that your husband should have to have been found guilty is a bit late. And my husband was carrying without a permit, and because of that, he was arrested, and because of that, I was saved. And so I want you to understand this is not, quote, constitutional right being violated. This is constitutional right to protect your citizens, which is also in the same Second Amendment. And it's been reiterated as a right to legislate protections in that same, by that same court that reiterated that it now does focus on individuals. So I want you to recognize that and what that means. Because domestic violence is a silent crime until it's over. And it's either over that you survive, or it's over that you don't. And I am one of 100,000 women in the state of Maine who is likely to face domestic violence. Those are the numbers, sometime during your life. So this is not a small number of people, not just a few, it's many. There are many questions that you should be asking, and I have listed those in my references that are attached to the document you have. When police issue concealed gun permits, the public does presume safety exists, yet data now shows that even the police have failed, and that's something you should be working on to make it a better system. Texas issued permits to more than 400 criminals, and Florida issued permits to 1,400 that had pled guilty on no contest and felonies. Did you know that trained police can't detect, literally cannot detect when a person has the right kind of concealed? It's not a matter of a coat putting over your hip. There are concealed elements that my husband used, and those prevented the first try when he was trying to kill me. They didn't arrest him because they didn't think he had a gun. They couldn't see it. Not until I told them what it was did they realize what happened, and they arrested him the second week later when he tried to kill me. So it's serious. I am not in favor of you taking away the protections of citizens that need those protections. And it's not a constitutional right to ignore safety for your citizens. I expect all of you to think about that.
Thank you. Now we have our own David Trahan. Former member of the legislature. He's ours. Praise the
Thank you, Senator Rosen, Representative Powell, distinguished members of the Committee on Criminal Justice and Public Safety, and David Trahan, Executive Director of the Sportsman's Alliance Committee, testifying in support of LD652, an act to authorize the carrying of concealed handguns with permit. The Sportsman's Alliance of Maine would like to thank Senator Brakey for introducing LD652. When passing legislation, it is always important to have a goal in mind. What is the goal of a concealed carry permit? If it is safety, are we safer because we have a concealed carry permit system? We believe the answer is no, it's the opposite. We live in a world where the media reports world events literally minutes after they happen. To watch the evening news is frightening. There are bombings in Boston, beheadings in Yemen, school shootings at college campuses, and countless random attacks. The first response from governments across the country is ban guns. My first thought is, I wish someone had a gun and could have stopped the violent attack before someone was killed. Whether we like it or not, there is a national movement underway to repeal laws that Second Amendment supporters believe makes our neighborhoods, streets, and homes unsafe. There's no coincidence that disturbed individuals will seek out gun-free zones to commit acts of mass violence and murder. Governments have recognized these gun-free zones are easy targets and have used armed guards to protect state and federal employees from random violence. There are armed guards at federal buildings. If you try to enter this state house, you must pass through a metal detector and a half dozen armed security personnel manning the building. When I board a plane, one of the first thoughts I have is, I hope there's an armed air marshal on the plane. Why would I think this? Answer, because everyone on the plane is unarmed and vulnerable, just like all the other places where our laws ban firearms for self-protection. And the sad reality is the air marshal is the only chance I and the rest of the passengers have to survive an attack if someone smuggled a weapon on the plane. I am going to find where you live and kill you all. That is the chilling message on my answering machine one night several years ago when I arrived home from a late Senate session. My first thought was to protect my wife and those around me. Except in order to carry a concealed firearm, I had to first acquire a permit. Should I have to wait a month and take a firearm class to defend myself against someone bent on killing me and my family? In the event this person was serious, all I could do was hope he didn't try to kill me and my family before I got my concealed carry permit. As our country elevates security in public places, Americans are arming themselves for protection. We understand that outside of places with armed guards, we are all vulnerable to criminals, terrorists, and the mental disorder. Nothing our government does can protect us everywhere we go. And that is why some law-abiding citizens want to arm themselves without the permission of the government, and we feel all the permission we need is contained in our Second Amendment. Yes, some reasonable regulation of firearms is necessary, but a piece of paper issued by a government protects us from nothing. But certainly, its delays can be used as a barrier to regulate us and make us more vulnerable to violence. Our current concealed carry permit system is ineffective, archaic, and was implemented as a well-meaning, feel-good response to criminal behavior. We believe non-prohibited individuals know best when to arm themselves, and a permit is unnecessary. Like the 5 states that no longer require concealed carry permits, we think people are safer when no one knows a person is legally carrying a firearm. For those that would say they want to know who is carrying in prohibited areas, I would respond, you have no way of knowing that now. We ask this committee to support LD652. One last thing, I represent just under 10,000 people, and I often have to speak for a lot of people. I did have a lot of complaints out in the hall. I'm speaking for Alex and Hillary Titcomb with their 4-month-old in their arms. They had to leave early. It was a long time, I think well after 4 before the first person had a chance, first public person had a chance to speak in a public hearing. And I respectfully act as a lightning rod for them when I bring their message to you that many, many people went home and were very, very sad that they didn't have a chance to testify. Thank you.
Next, we have Frederick Swan.
I've never done this before, so bear with me. My name is Frederick Swan. I'm here today in support of LD652. My friends here today have touched on very important points here, and I wish to note that I fully agree with what they have stated. I would like to point out, however, the way in which the law is structured in order to protect citizens. Namely, that the citizen is presumed innocent under the law until proven guilty of a crime. Nowhere does the law require an individual to prove their innocence because the burden of proof is on the courts to prove beyond reasonable doubt that an individual has in fact committed a criminal act. The permitting requirement for concealed carry of firearms is unlawful in part because it places the burden of proof on the citizen. It presumes guilt in the absence of any evidence. It requires that an individual prove to the government that he or she is not of a criminal bent. An individual is therefore required to testify to a governing body of their good character, whereas our foundational law makes no such requirement and further restricts government from instituting any such requirement upon the citizenry. The government must make an evidence-based plea that any individual has actually committed a crime. The current law presumes that all Mainers are conspiring to commit felony assault with a deadly weapon, and we must therefore provide evidence to the contrary. Any law which would presume guilt in the absence of evidence should rightly be struck down. I would urge this committee to vote ought to pass with regards to LD652, where it is clear that the current law is in violation of the Fifth Amendment, which states in part that no person shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good job. John from Carmina.
You didn't want to try that last name?
I didn't. But I'd love to hear it from you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Senator Rosen, Representative Fowler, and members of the committee, I'm John Zarowski from Corinna, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to voice my support for LD 652. I've been many things in my life: a volunteer EMT and firefighter, a soldier in the Army Reserve, a successful manager for a Fortune 500 company. When my wife and I fulfilled our dream and relocated to Maine to start our family, I traded in my tie and loafers for cloth diapers, homemade baby food, and teething rings, my stethoscope and bunker boots for a coach's whistle and cleats. These days, I volunteer in my children's classroom instead of on an ambulance or fire truck. I write the newsletter and occasionally give an occasional sermon at my church. I help coach fall soccer, indoor soccer, and t-ball with the recreation department in town. And I try and make sure my son's teacher is always well-stocked with glue sticks, crayons, and tissues. Like thousands of other Maine people, I'm just a decent person raising a family and trying to be an active and productive member of his community. And like thousands of other Maine people, I also sometimes carry a firearm. Today, you've heard and will hear claims that passing LD 652 will make it easier for criminals to get guns, will lead to increased violence and bloodshed, and that we must ensure background checks take place. James has already covered the criminals and why the background permit system doesn't really apply to them. I don't believe any of those claims are true. They haven't been borne out by the practical experience of other constitutional carry states, and at best they're only tenuously supported by the most selective and extreme cherry picking and tortured statistical shenanigans. The Bangor Daily News provided a clear example of these shenanigans yesterday, while editorializing about a survey bought and paid for by Moms Demand Action in every town for gun safety. The results of the survey were too lopsided to ignore, the editors claimed. Well, of course they were, because rather than using scientific and reliable polling methods employed by reputable organizations such as Pew Research or Gallup, every town hired a strategic research firm that makes no secret about what they're selling. Research to support policy agendas and pass ballot measures. In other words, they create and sell you the research you need to support your agenda. As legislators, you balance individual rights against public safety. And when a compelling public safety concern actually exists, you must take action to preserve that safety, while simultaneously limiting individual rights only as much as necessary to get the job done. As you're trying to decide if such a concern exists and is compelling enough to warrant continuing Maine's problematic permit system, please consider the example that I and thousands of other gun owners set daily. Weigh that example against the agenda-driven research every town and its supporters will buy for you. If you pass LD652, I and other gun owners will still continue to train. We will continue to compete in a variety of shooting sports and competitions to be safe and responsible gun owners. We will still be productive and civic-minded community members, active and engaged mothers and fathers, coaches and classroom volunteers. We will still pass background checks when we buy firearms. Maine will still be a great place to live, work, and raise a family, an incredibly beautiful and safe state where its citizens are entrusted to responsibly exercise individual rights, and where the claims of increased violence and bloodshed once again just didn't pan out. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.